When Victoria Hayes closed her office door that Tuesday afternoon, James Carter thought he was being fired. The quarterly numbers were solid. His team had exceeded projections by 18%, but logic rarely governed summons to the corner office on the 42nd floor. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched in geometric precision below a grid of certainty that mocked the uncertainty knotting his stomach. Victoria didn't look up immediately. She was reading something on her tablet, her expression locked behind designer frames she wore when negotiations turned serious. At 39, she commanded Summit Tech Solutions with the kind of quiet authority that made men twice her age defer without question. James had worked under her for 4 years, learning to read her moods by the set of her shoulders, the angle of her chin. Today, those shoulders carried a tension he'd never witnessed before. The words came without preamble, delivered in a voice that trembled despite her obvious effort at control. "I'm pregnant, the baby's yours." James's mind went to logistics, first maternity leave interim leadership, how this would affect the merger talks with the Seattle firm. It was reflex the way his brain always jumped to problem-solving mode when presented with new information. Then the second part of her statement registered, and every logical thought evaporated like steam. 3 months ago, the industry conference in Denver, the hotel bar after the final panel when they'd both been exhausted and honest in a way they never were in the office, the conversation that had stretched past midnight fueled by whiskey, and the strange intimacy of being away from the roles they wore like armor, the kiss that had surprised them both, the walk to her room that had felt inevitable and terrifying and completely unlike anything James had done since Julia died. They'd agreed the next morning over awkward coffee that it had been a mistake, not because it wasn't good, it had been startlingly dangerously good, but because they worked together, because the power dynamic was impossible, because they were both too old and too scarred to pretend casual meant anything other than complicated. They'd flown home on separate flights, returned to the office, and never spoke of it again. James had convinced himself it was a closed chapter, a moment of weakness that could be filed away and forgotten. Apparently, biology had other plans. His voice sounded strange to his own ears when he finally spoke, too calm, like he was asking about a project deadline. "How far along?" Victoria's hands were clasped so tightly on the desk that her knuckles had gone white. 11 weeks. I found out 6 days ago. I've been to 2 doctors, both confirmed it. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything. 11 weeks. That meant she was almost through the first trimester, the high-risk period for miscarriage, though James hated himself for thinking in those terms. This wasn't a liability to be managed. This was a child, his child. Through the glass walls of her office, James could see the rest of the executive floor continuing its usual rhythm. Assistants moved between cubicles, senior managers hunched over laptops, the familiar choreography of corporate efficiency. None of them could hear what happened in this soundproofed room. Victoria had made sure of that when she'd had it installed 3 years ago, and now James understood why privacy mattered in ways that had nothing to do with corporate espionage. "I need you to understand something." Victoria removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the desk between them. She folded her hands, then unfolded them, picked up a pen, put it down. James had seen her negotiate multi-million-dollar deals without a single wasted gesture. This hesitation was more alarming than any anger would have been. "I'm not asking you for anything. Not money, not involvement, not even acknowledgement. I'm telling you because you deserve to know, but I don't expect anything to change. I'm fully prepared to handle this alone." The words sparked something hot in James's chest, an emotion that took him a moment to identify as anger, not at her, but at the assumption underlying her statement. "You think I'd walk away? I think you're a single father with a 7-year-old daughter and a career you've built through incredible discipline." Victoria's expression didn't change, but her voice softened slightly. "I think this is probably the last thing you need in your life right now, and I wouldn't blame you for wanting to pretend this conversation never happened." James stood abruptly, walking to the windows because he needed to move, needed to do something with the energy suddenly coursing through him. Below, the city stretched out in geometric precision, streets and buildings and lives intersecting in patterns that made sense from up here. Down there, in the actual mess of human existence, nothing was ever this clear. The memory came unbidden: Julia's hospital room, the antiseptic smell mixing with something sweet and rotten that he'd later learned was her body shutting down. Emma had been 6 months old, too young to understand why mommy was too weak to hold her. Julia had been diagnosed when Emma was 3 months old, breast cancer aggressive, already metastasized by the time they caught it, dead before their daughter's first birthday. What James remembered most from that time wasn't the medical procedures or the endless decisions about treatment options. It was the look in Julia's eyes when she knew she was dying. Not fear for herself, fear that Emma would grow up without a mother, fear that James would have to do this alone. Her last coherent words to him had been delivered in a morphine haze, her hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Don't let her forget me." He'd spent 6.5 years being both parents, learning to braid hair and pack lunches and explain why mommy can't come to the school play. Emma had asked him exactly once why she doesn't have a mother like other kids. James had knelt down to her eye level, his daughter's face solemn with the weight of a question no 5-year-old should have to ask, and told her that sometimes people we love get sick and don't get better. The truth, because he'd learned that lies, even kind ones, created deeper wounds than honesty ever could. James turned back to face Victoria. I lost my wife when Emma was 6 months old, breast cancer. She was diagnosed when Emma was 3 months, dead before our daughter's first birthday. Victoria started to speak, but James held up a hand. The words needed to come out now, all of them, before his courage failed. Do you know what I remember most from that time? I remember the look in Julia's eyes when she knew she was dying. Not fear for herself, fear that Emma would grow up without a mother, fear that I'd have to do this alone. Her last coherent words to me were, "Don't let her forget me." His hands had curled into fists. James forced them open, forced his voice level. "I've spent 6.5 years being both parents, learning to braid hair and pack lunches and explain why mommy can't come to the school play. Emma has asked me exactly once why she doesn't have a mother like other kids, and I had to tell my 6-year-old daughter that sometimes people we love get sick and don't get better." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language, like his response had been so far outside her expectations that she needed time to translate it. When James spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a decision already made. "So, no, Victoria, I'm not walking away. I don't care how complicated this is or how it looks or what it means for our careers. There's a child coming who's going to need a father, and I know exactly what happens when a kid grows up with only one parent because the other one isn't there. I won't let that happen. Not again. Not ever." Victoria's composure finally fractured. Her eyes went bright with something that might have been tears, though she didn't let them fall. "I'm 39 years old. I've spent 20 years building a company. I've never wanted children, never saw them fitting into my life." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been on birth control since I was 16, never missed a pill, never had a scare. Apparently antibiotics can interfere with hormonal contraceptives. I had a sinus infection in Denver, took a Z-Pack. Didn't think anything of it because why would I?" Her hand moved to her stomach flat, still beneath the expensive fabric of her suit. "And now I can't stop thinking about it, about this little cluster of cells that's going to become a person who will have your eyes, maybe, or my stubbornness, a person who didn't ask to exist but exists anyway because two adults made a decision one night without considering all the variables." Victoria looked up at him, and James saw past the CEO, past the woman who'd built an empire from a garage startup to something raw and terrified underneath. "I don't know if I want this baby, James. I know I should. I know the right answer is supposed to be clear, but I'm terrified and confused and completely out of my depth, and I hate feeling this way." James understood that feeling. He'd lived it when Julia got diagnosed, when the doctors had laid out treatment options that all sounded like different flavors of hopeless, when he'd had to make decisions about his wife's body, her suffering, her final months. Knowing that every choice might be the wrong one, he moved back to the chair but didn't sit. "You don't have to decide everything today, but I need you to hear me. Whatever you choose, you're not doing it alone. If you decide to continue this pregnancy, I'm in fully, completely, not as an obligation or a burden, but as a father who wants to be there." James paused, meeting her eyes directly. "And if you decide you can't do this, I'll support that too, but I need to be part of the conversation. This isn't just happening to you." "You're taking this remarkably well," Victoria said, her laugh shaky. "I'm not. I'm absolutely losing my mind. I just happen to be very good at compartmentalizing." James allowed himself a small smile. "Give me about 3 hours and I'll probably have a complete breakdown in my car." "That's fair." Victoria straightened in her chair, some of her executive composure returning, like armor being donned piece by piece. "I'm scheduling my first real appointment for next week. Ultrasound, full workup. Do you want to be there?" The answer came without hesitation. "Yes. Text me the details. I'll clear my schedule." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd said settling around them like dust after an explosion. Through the glass walls, Garrett Thompson walked past with a stack of files, oblivious to the fact that the world inside this office had just realigned on its axis. "We should talk about work," Victoria said. "Eventually, about how this affects our positions here. Later." James stood. "Right now you need to process this, and I need to figure out how to tell my 7-year-old that she's going to be a big sister." Victoria's eyes widened. "You're going to tell Emma, she's my daughter. I don't keep things from her, not the important stuff." James moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "I learned with Julia that kids can handle a lot more truth than we think. It's the lies and the secrets that damage them. What if she hates me? What if she resents the baby? Emma's the most empathetic person I know. She cried for a week when her goldfish died." James looked back at Victoria. "Give her some credit and give yourself some too. You're stronger than you think." I run a Fortune 500 company, James. I know I'm strong. That's not the kind of strength I'm talking about. He left before she could respond, walking through the executive floor with steady steps that belied the chaos in his head. His office was 3 doors down, smaller than Victoria's, but still impressive by corporate standards. James closed the door and sat at his desk, staring at the framed photo of Emma that lived next to his computer. She was grinning in that picture, missing her 2 front teeth, chocolate ice cream smeared on her chin. Julia had taken it 2 months before she died, one of the last good days when she'd had enough strength to take Emma to the park. James kept it there as a reminder of why he worked the hours he did, why he pushed for every promotion and fought for every raise. Now there would be another child, another mouth to feed, another college fund to build another life depending on him to not screw things up. The breakdown he'd predicted came right on schedule. He put his head in his hands and let himself feel it, the terror, the impossibility, the sheer overwhelming magnitude of what came next. He gave himself 5 minutes, then he pulled out his phone and called the one person who might understand. Daniel Morrison answered on the second ring, his brother-in-law's voice carrying the easy warmth that had made him Julia's favorite sibling. James, everything okay? I need to talk. The playground at Emma's school was mostly empty when James arrived for pickup. He was early, deliberately so. He needed time to compose himself to figure out what he was going to say. Through the chain link fence, he could see the second graders streaming out of the building, a chaotic river of backpacks and shouting. Emma spotted him immediately. She always did. His daughter had an uncanny ability to find him in any crowd, some combination of hyper-awareness and love that never failed to make his chest ache. She waved her blonde ponytail, bouncing as she ran toward the gate, and James felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him like a cloak. Emma barreled into his legs with the force of a small missile, and he caught her, lifting her into a hug that she was probably getting too old for, but hadn't outgrown yet. She smelled like pencil shavings and the strawberry shampoo she'd insisted on buying last week, familiar scents that anchored him to the present moment. Dad, guess what happened in math today? What happened in math, sweetheart? Emma's face was bright with pride as she launched into an explanation. Mr. Peterson let me explain fractions to the whole class because I got all the problems right, and he said I was a natural teacher. Can you be a teacher when you're also a scientist? Because I still want to study space, but maybe I could teach other people about space too. You can be anything you want as long as you work hard and stay curious. They walked to the car, hand in hand, Emma chattering about her day in the way she did when something good had happened. James let her talk, using the familiar rhythm of her voice to steady himself. This was his life school pickups and homework, help, and bedtime stories. Simple things that had somehow become sacred in the years since Julia died. Now he was about to complicate everything. He waited until they were home, until Emma had hung up her backpack and washed her hands and was settled at the kitchen table, with her afternoon snack, apple slices and peanut butter, carefully arranged the way she liked. James sat across from her, watching her dip an apple slice with surgical precision. Bug, I need to talk to you about something important. Emma looked up, instantly alert. At 7, she already had Julia's intuition, that ability to read the emotional temperature of a room and respond accordingly. Her eyes searched his face, and James saw the shadow of old fear cross them, the fear that had lived in her since she was old enough to understand that parents could disappear. Are you sick? No, honey. Nothing like that. James reached across the table, covering her small hand with his. Do you remember a few months ago when I went to that conference in Denver? I was gone for 4 days. Emma nodded slowly. You brought me back a snow globe. That's right. Well, while I was there, I spent time with Miss Hayes. You remember her? She's my boss. You met her at the company picnic last summer. Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. The lady with the pretty watch. Yes. Well, Miss Hayes and I became very close friends during that trip, and now she's going to have a baby. James took a breath. This was harder than he'd anticipated, and he'd anticipated it being nearly impossible. The baby is going to be my child, which means it's going to be your little brother or sister. He watched his daughter process this, her face cycling through confusion, surprise, and something that might have been calculation. Emma was frighteningly smart for her age, capable of making connections that sometimes startled him. The question came carefully, each word chosen with a precision that shouldn't have been possible for someone who still lost her baby teeth. Is Miss Hayes going to be my new mom? No, sweetheart. Miss Hayes and I aren't married. We're not even dating, but we're going to work together to take care of this baby the same way I take care of you. Emma set down her apple slice with deliberate care. Are you going to love the baby more than me? The question drove straight through James's heart like a blade made of ice in desperation. He came around the table, immediately kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level so she could see his face when he made this promise. Emma, listen to me. I will never, ever love anyone more than I love you. You're my first girl, my bug, my whole heart. That doesn't change. Love doesn't work like a pie where you only have so many slices to give out. It grows. When this baby comes, I'm going to love them too. But it won't take anything away from what I feel for you. Do you understand? Promise. I promise. James pulled her into his arms, feeling her small frame against his chest, her heartbeat steady against his. You're always going to be my number one. They stayed like that for a long moment. When Emma pulled back, she was calmer, though her forehead was still creased with thought. Is Miss Hayes scared? The question surprised him with its insight. Why would you think that? Because when Amanda's mom had a baby last year, Amanda said her mom cried a lot before it came. She said having babies is scary even when you want them. Emma tilted her head, studying him with those two old eyes. Does Miss Hayes want the baby? James sat back on his heels, struck by his daughter's ability to zero in on the one question that mattered most. Out of everything they'd discussed, Emma had found the heart of it, the uncertainty, the fear, the question Victoria herself couldn't answer. But I think she's figuring that out. Having a baby is a big change, and sometimes big changes are scary, even for grown-ups. Emma considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing evidence, then with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never doubted her father's ability to fix things, she delivered her verdict. You should tell her it's going to be okay. You're really good at being a dad. You can help her learn. Something in James's throat went tight. He reached out and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind Emma's ear, a gesture so familiar it was muscle memory, and felt the weight of her trust settle over him like a blessing he didn't deserve but would fight to honor anyway. You're pretty amazing, you know that. Emma grinned, the tension breaking. I know. Can I have more apple slices? Yes, you can. James got up, moving to the counter to cut more fruit, his hands remarkably steady considering the conversation they'd just had. Behind him, Emma had already returned to her snack, the crisis apparently resolved in her 7-year-old mind, if only adult problems were so easily solved. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and James pulled it out to find a text from Victoria, appointment scheduled for next Wednesday, 2 p.m. I'll send you the address. He typed back, I'll be there. Another buzz. Thank you for everything you said today. I didn't expect... The message cut off mid-sentence. James waited, but no follow-up came. He understood. There were things too complicated to put into words, feelings too new to articulate. They'd figure it out. They had to. That night, after Emma was asleep, James stood in the doorway of her room, watching her breathe. She looked so small under her star-patterned comforter, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. She'd wanted to keep her nightlight on the one shaped like the moon that Julia had bought years ago. It cast soft shadows across the walls, familiar and comforting. A connection to a woman who'd been gone longer than Emma could probably remember. 6.5 years of this. 6.5 years of being everything Emma needed, of making every decision alone, of carrying the full weight of parenthood on his shoulders. James had gotten good at it, better than he'd ever imagined possible when Julia died and left him drowning in grief and terror. Now there would be another child, another set of midnight feedings and first words and skinned knees, another person depending on him to get it right. But this time he wouldn't be completely alone. Victoria would be there. And while they weren't together, while this wasn't the family structure he'd imagined when Julia was alive and they'd talked about having more kids someday, it was something. A partnership built on honesty and mutual respect and a shared commitment to doing right by this child they'd created. It would have to be enough. James's phone buzzed again and he stepped into the hallway, closing Emma's door quietly. Another text from Victoria. I can't sleep. Keep thinking about everything. He sat down on the top step, phone in hand. Me too. Did you tell Emma? Yes. She asked if you were scared. A long pause. Then what did you say? That you're figuring things out, that big changes are scary for everyone. I am scared, terrified, actually. I've run this company through 3 economic downturns and a hostile takeover attempt, and none of that was as frightening as seeing those 2 lines on the pregnancy test. James thought about how to respond, his thumbs hovering over the screen. Fear means you understand what's at stake. That's not a bad thing. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm, I'm just practiced at functioning while terrified. 6 years of single parenthood will do that. I don't know how to be a mother, James. I don't have the first clue. The confession hit him harder than it should have, maybe because it was so raw, so unlike the woman who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. James thought about Julia, about how she'd been so naturally good with Emma from the moment she was born, how she'd made it look effortless even when he knew she was exhausted, even when the cancer was eating her alive from the inside. But he also thought about himself, about those first terrible months after she died, when he'd had to learn everything from scratch, how to soothe a crying infant at 3 a.m, how to make bottles and change diapers and sing lullabies in his rough, off-key voice, how to be enough when he felt like nothing. Nobody knows how to be a parent until they are one, he typed. You learn, you make mistakes, you try again, and somehow the kid turns out okay. Emma's more than okay. She's extraordinary. She's a good kid, takes after her mom. Another pause longer this time. When Victoria's response came, it made something shift in James's chest. I'm glad you told her that she didn't hate the idea. She asked if she could help take care of the baby. Said she'd teach them about space and fractions. She's 7. She's 7 going on 30. Trust me, by the time this baby arrives, she'll have a whole curriculum planned out. James could almost hear Victoria's laugh through the screen, imagined her alone in some pristine apartment surrounded by the markers of her successful but solitary life. The idea bothered him more than it should have, this woman carrying his child, facing the biggest transformation of her life, doing it alone in the dark. I'm going to try to sleep, Victoria texted. Thank you for today, for not running. I meant what I said. You're not alone in this. Good night, James. Good night. He sat there for a while longer, phone dark in his hand, listening to the quiet sounds of his house, the refrigerator humming downstairs, the old furnace clicking as it cycled Emma's soft breathing through her closed door. 7 months from now, maybe less if the baby came early, all of this would change. His carefully constructed life, the routines he'd built to keep himself and Emma stable, the balance he'd worked so hard to maintain, all of it would shift to accommodate this new person who didn't even exist yet in any tangible way. James thought about Victoria's face in that office, about the fear underneath her composure. He thought about Emma's question, is Miss Hayes scared? Yeah, she was scared, so was he, but fear had never stopped him before. It hadn't stopped him when Julia got sick, when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. It hadn't stopped him when he'd held his newborn daughter for the first time after her mother died, when he'd looked into those tiny, trusting eyes and promised to be enough for her. It wouldn't stop him now. The morning came with its usual chaos, Emma's alarm echoing down the hallway, the familiar beep that signaled another school day. James moved through the routine on autopilot, making breakfast, checking homework, braiding hair that never quite looked as neat as when Julia had done it. Emma chattered about her science project, something involving plants and sunlight, and James nodded in the right places while his mind circled back to Victoria, to the appointment next Wednesday, to the reality slowly crystallizing around him. He dropped Emma at school, watched her run toward her friends with that effortless joy only children seem to possess, then sat in his car for a full minute before starting the engine. The drive to Summit Tech Solutions took 32 minutes in morning traffic, 32 minutes to prepare himself for walking into that building and pretending everything was normal when his entire world had tilted sideways. Victoria's office was dark when he passed it. Melissa Donnelly, her assistant, looked up from her desk with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Carter, Miss Hayes called in this morning. She won't be in until after lunch. James felt something tighten in his chest. Is she all right? Melissa's expression flickered with curiosity. She didn't say, just asked me to reschedule her morning meetings. Thank you. James continued to his office, closing the door behind him before pulling out his phone. The text he sent was simple. Everything okay? Victoria's response came 5 minutes later. Morning sickness. Apparently it doesn't just happen in the morning. I'll be in by 1. Do you need anything? Ginger tea and a time machine. I can only get one of those at the store. Despite everything, James smiled. He forwarded a request to Melissa to stock Victoria's office with ginger tea, then forced himself to focus on work. The quarterly analysis wouldn't write itself, and he had a presentation to the board next week that needed to be flawless. But concentration proved elusive. Every few minutes, his mind drifted to Victoria, hunched over a toilet somewhere, dealing with the physical reality of pregnancy alone. By noon, he'd made a decision. The deli 3 blocks from Summit Tech made the best chicken soup in Chicago. James had discovered it during Emma's bout with flu last winter, and the recipe had become his go-to comfort food. He ordered 2 containers, one plain, one with extra vegetables, along with fresh bread and more ginger tea than one person could reasonably drink. He was back at his desk by 12:30, the food carefully packed in an insulated bag that he tucked under his desk. At 1:15, Melissa's voice came through the office intercom system with the announcement that Miss Hayes had arrived. James gave her 20 minutes to settle, then picked up the bag and headed down the hall. He knocked on Victoria's door despite it being open. She looked up from her computer, and even from across the room, James could see the exhaustion etched into her features. Her skin had a grayish cast, and her eyes were rimmed with red. She'd clearly tried to cover it with makeup, but the effort had only partially succeeded. I brought lunch. Victoria's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been gratitude. You didn't have to do that. I know. Can I come in? She hesitated, then nodded. James entered, closing the door behind him before setting the bag on the small table by her window. He unpacked the containers, methodically arranging them like an offering to gods he wasn't sure existed, but figured couldn't hurt to appease. Chicken soup. Plain broth if your stomach can't handle anything else, or vegetables if you're feeling ambitious. He glanced at her. Bread, ginger tea, and saltines, because my research this morning said they help with nausea. Victoria stared at the spread, something unreadable crossing her face. You researched morning sickness? I researched everything. Morning sickness, prenatal nutrition, first trimester symptoms, warning signs that require immediate medical attention. James pulled out a chair. I might have gone overboard, but I needed to feel useful. James, Victoria's voice was soft, almost fragile. You're not responsible for taking care of me. I know that too, but I want to. Is that all right? The question hung between them, and James watched something shift in Victoria's expression, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the woman beneath the CEO. She reached for the plain broth, her movements careful testing. The first sip went down slowly. She waited, clearly bracing for her stomach to rebel. When nothing happened, she took another. They sat in silence while she worked through the broth, and James felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace, but a sense of rightness of doing what needed to be done. This was what came next. This was how they'd build whatever this was between them, one small gesture at a time, until the structure could hold the weight of what was coming. Wednesday arrived with the weight of a deadline. James had blocked his entire afternoon telling his team he had an important personal matter to attend to. Sophie was at a friend's house. Marcus had arranged it, asking no questions when James said he needed the afternoon free. The clinic was in a medical building downtown, all glass and steel that caught the afternoon sun. James met Victoria in the lobby, both of them awkward in a way they never were at the office. The professional distance that usually defined their interaction had dissolved, leaving them uncertain how to navigate this new territory. Victoria's hand moved to her stomach in a gesture that was becoming familiar, protective, and unconscious. You came. James heard the surprise in her voice, the unspoken question underneath. You're really here. I said I would. They rode the elevator to the third floor in silence. The waiting room was painted in soft blues and greens, clearly designed to be calming. Other women sat in various stages of pregnancy, some alone, some with partners, one with what looked like her entire extended family. James and Victoria checked in at the desk, then found seats in the corner. I've never been this nervous before a meeting. Victoria's admission came quietly, meant only for him. James reached over and took her hand. The gesture surprised them both, but he didn't pull away. It's going to be fine. You don't know that. No. But I believe it anyway. When the nurse called Victoria's name, she stood, then looked at James questioningly. He stood too, and together they followed the nurse down a hallway lined with educational posters about fetal development and breastfeeding. The exam room was small but efficient, clinical in its sterility. The nurse took Miranda's vitals, asked a series of questions about her medical history, then smiled at them both. Dr. Whitmore will be right in. Congratulations, by the way. After she left, Victoria changed into a hospital gown while James studied the fetal development chart on the wall with intense focus. At 11 weeks, the baby was about the size of a fig, had fingers and toes, could swallow and yawn. These facts felt both impossibly abstract and terrifyingly concrete. Dr. Rebecca Whitmore knocked before entering a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She shook both their hands, then pulled up a rolling stool. So first pregnancy at 39, you're in good health, no major medical concerns. Your initial blood work looks excellent. How are you feeling? Nauseous, exhausted, emotional. Dr. Whitmore nodded her expression, conveying that she'd heard this litany 1,000 times before. All completely normal. The first trimester is usually the hardest in terms of symptoms. She glanced at James. And you're the father? Yes. Good. Partner support makes a tremendous difference. Dr. Whitmore turned back to Victoria. Let's take a look at this baby, shall we? The ultrasound machine looked like something from a science fiction movie, all screens and sensors and technology that seemed too advanced for something as ancient as creating life. Dr. Whitmore squeezed gel onto Victoria's abdomen, then pressed the wand against her skin. The screen flickered to life, showing shapes and shadows that James couldn't immediately interpret. Then Dr. Whitmore adjusted something, and there it was. A tiny figure curled in on itself, a flickering spot that the doctor identified as the heartbeat. Arms and legs beginning to take shape, a head that looked disproportionately large, proof of life undeniable and immediate. James couldn't breathe. He'd seen ultrasounds before, dozens of them during Julia's pregnancy with Emma. But this was different. This was his child, this impossible, microscopic person who'd been created by accident and was now undeniably real. Victoria's hand found his and squeezed hard. There's your baby, Dr. Whitmore said warmly, measuring right on track for 11 weeks. Heartbeat is strong and steady at 162 beats per minute. Everything looks exactly as it should. Would you like to hear the heartbeat? Victoria nodded, and suddenly the room filled with sound, a rapid whooshing like horses galloping fast and strong and insistent, proof of life in its most elemental form. James felt his throat close up. Beside him, Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That's our baby, she whispered. That's our baby. James confirmed, his voice breaking on the words. Dr. Whitmore let them listen for a long moment before adjusting the wand to take measurements. She printed out several images, handing them to Victoria with a smile that suggested she never tired of this part of her job. I'm moving your due date slightly based on the measurements. July 23rd, but babies come when they want to come, so anywhere from mid-July to early August is normal. The parking garage conversation happened in that strange liminal space. After the appointment, both of them standing beside their cars, neither quite ready to leave and return to their separate lives. Victoria clutched the ultrasound pictures like they were sacred texts, and maybe they were proof that this was real, that the future was coming, whether they were ready or not. I wasn't sure until just now, Victoria said quietly. If I wanted this, if I could do this. She looked down at the grainy images. But I heard that heartbeat and everything else stopped mattering. All the logistics, the fear, the questions, none of it was as important as that sound. You're going to be a mother. We're going to be parents. Victoria looked up at him, and James saw his own emotions reflected back, joy and terror and wonder tangled together. Both of us, I need to stop thinking of this as my problem and start thinking of it as our situation, like you said. A pause, and then so quietly he almost missed it. I'm terrified. Me too. They stood there as other people came and went, loading into cars, heading back to their lives. Finally, Victoria spoke again, the words coming out in a rush like she needed to say them before her courage failed. Would you want to come over tonight, not for anything romantic, just to talk about the baby, about what comes next? I don't want to be alone with this right now. James thought about Emma, about the homework help she'd need, and the bedtime routine they'd established. But Daniel could handle it. Daniel had told him last week to call anytime he needed backup. I'd like that. I need to arrange childcare, but I can be there by 7. Victoria surprised him, surprised herself, judging by her expression. Bring Emma, if you want. I should probably get to know her better if we're going to be in each other's lives. Emma was predictably excited about the unexpected outing. She changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on her favorite purple dress with the stars on it, and peppered James with questions during the drive. Does Miss Hayes have a big house? Does she have a dog? Can she cook? What if she doesn't like me? James answered what he could reassured where he couldn't, and watched his daughter's enthusiasm with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Emma had a gift for making friends, for seeing the best in people, but this was different. This was the woman who would be in their lives forever, the mother of Emma's sibling, a permanent fixture in their family structure. Victoria's apartment was in a high rise overlooking Lake Michigan, all modern lines and expensive furniture. She greeted them at the door in jeans and a sweater, the most casual James had ever seen her, and her eyes went immediately to Emma. You must be Emma. I've heard wonderful things about you. Emma stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. Dad says you're having a baby and it's going to be my brother or sister. I'm going to teach them about space. Victoria blinked, then smiled a real smile that softened her entire face. I'd like that. Come in, both of you. The apartment was exactly what James expected, immaculate, sophisticated, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. It was also completely unprepared for children. Everything was white or glass or both surfaces that showed fingerprints, furniture that wasn't meant to be climbed on. Emma gravitated immediately to the windows. You can see everything from up here, Dad. Look, there's Navy Pier. Victoria moved to the kitchen, pulling out drinks with the careful hospitality of someone who didn't entertain often. I have juice boxes. I wasn't sure what 7-year-olds drink. Juice boxes are perfect, James assured her. They settled in the living room, Emma on the floor, despite the pristine white couch, examining the ultrasound pictures Victoria had laid out on the coffee table. That's the baby, it's so small. Victoria sat down carefully, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach again. It'll get bigger. By the time it's born, it'll be about 20 inches long. Emma's eyes went wide. Like my doll collection, I have 17 dolls. I could give some to the baby when it comes. Babies like dolls, right? I think so, though we don't know yet if it's a boy or girl. Emma delivered her verdict with the absolute certainty of her generation. Boys can like dolls too. My friend James has 3 baby dolls, and he takes really good care of them. He says when he grows up, he wants to be a dad like mine. Something in James's throat tightened again. Victoria glanced at him, and in her expression he saw understanding recognition of what it meant that his daughter had grown up thinking being a father like James was something to aspire to. They ordered pizza Emma's choice and ate while Emma entertained them with stories about school, her friends, her upcoming science project. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just humoring a child. After dinner, Emma settled on the couch with her tablet while James and Victoria moved to the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning up. They worked in companionable silence, a rhythm developing naturally between them, James washing Victoria, drying, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence in the small space. She's amazing. Victoria's voice was quiet. You've done an incredible job with her. She makes it easy. She's naturally kind. Victoria paused in her drying, looking at him over the dish towel. I needed to see this. What you do, how you parent. I keep thinking I'm going to fail at this, that I'm going to be terrible at being a mother because I've spent my whole life focused on work instead of relationships. James set down the glass he'd been washing, turning to face her fully. I wasn't naturally good at it. When Julia died, I was a disaster. I couldn't figure out how to work the bottle warmer. I forgot to burp Emma, and she'd spit up all over both of us. I once put her diaper on backward and didn't realize until it leaked everywhere. He smiled at the memories, painful then, but softened now by time and distance. But I kept trying. Eventually, through sheer repetition, I got better. That's all parenting, is showing up every day and trying your best. Victoria wiped her eyes quickly, her composure cracking again. I'm so emotional lately. Everything makes me cry. Hormones. That's normal too. From the living room, Emma's voice called out, Miss Hayes, can I ask you something? They both moved back to find Emma still on the couch, but her tablet was down. She looked between them with serious eyes, and James recognized the expression, his daughter working up to a question that mattered. What is it, sweetheart? Emma's gaze fixed on Victoria. When the baby comes, are you going to live with us, or is the baby going to have 2 houses? The question hung in the air, simple and complex, all at once. James and Victoria exchanged glances, and he saw his own uncertainty reflected in her face. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't gotten anywhere close to planning logistics that far ahead. James sat down on the arm of the couch. We haven't figured that out yet. What do you think would be best? Emma considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing a verdict. I think the baby should have both parents together, like Amanda's baby brother. He lives with both his parents. She paused. But I know you and Miss Hayes aren't married, so maybe that's different. Victoria's voice was gentle when she responded. It is different. Your dad and I are friends. We're going to work together to take care of the baby, but we might not live in the same house. But you could visit us and we could visit you. Definitely, James added. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. She returned to her tablet, and the adults moved back to the kitchen, but the question lingered between them, a reminder that decisions would need to be made, structures built, futures planned. They stayed until Emma started yawning, her head drooping toward the couch cushion. James scooped her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, automatically, already half asleep. At the door, Victoria touched his arm. Thank you for coming, for bringing her. This helped more than you know. Same time next week, Victoria smiled. I'd like that. Driving home with Emma asleep in the back seat, James felt something shift inside him. This was real now, not just an abstract concept or a problem to be solved, but an actual future taking shape. In 7 months, there would be another child, another person who depended on him, another life to protect and nurture and love. But this time, he wouldn't be completely alone. Victoria would be there, imperfect and scared and figuring things out just like he was, but there. And somehow that made all the difference. The next morning at the office, James noticed something, whispers among senior staff. Stephen Brooks, the COO, in a closed-door meeting with Richard Hamilton, a board member known for being old school, traditional, ruthless. Hamilton had never liked Victoria's aggressive leadership style, had made no secret of his belief that the company would be better served by more conservative management. James overheard a fragment as he passed the conference room, Hamilton's voice carrying through the supposedly soundproof walls. Medical situation, interim leadership, proper protocols. He realized with a cold certainty that somehow word was getting out, or Hamilton was fishing. Either way, trouble was coming, gathering like storm clouds on a distant horizon. James pulled out his phone and texted Victoria. We might have a problem. Call me when you can. Victoria's response came immediately. In meeting. Call you at lunch. James had a bad feeling, the kind of instinct that had served him well in his years of navigating corporate politics. The storm was gathering, and Victoria didn't even know yet. But she would soon. They both would. And when it came, they'd face it together. 3 weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Victoria was 14 weeks pregnant now, the nausea beginning to ease slightly, though exhaustion still claimed her most afternoons. James and Victoria had established a pattern weekly dinners at her apartment with Emma, careful conversations about prenatal vitamins and doctor's appointments, a partnership that felt more solid with each passing day. Then Tuesday morning shattered the fragile equilibrium. James was in a strategy meeting with the senior leadership team reviewing quarterly projections that would determine next year's budget allocations. The numbers demanded his full attention, but his mind kept drifting to the text Victoria had sent that morning about feeling unusually tired, about a dull ache in her lower back that wouldn't quite resolve. Melissa Donnelly appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color in a way that made James's stomach drop before she'd spoken a word. She caught his eye, mouthed something he couldn't parse, but the urgency was unmistakable, the kind of alarm that bypassed professional courtesy and went straight to primal fear. James excused himself, following Melissa into the hallway where she kept her voice low enough that the others wouldn't hear. It's Ms. Hayes. She collapsed in her office about 10 minutes ago. The paramedics are with her now. The next moments blurred into fragments running down the corridor, bursting through Victoria's door to find 2 EMTs crouched beside her chair. Victoria sat with an oxygen mask over her face, smaller somehow than he'd ever seen her, her skin carrying that grayish cast he remembered from Julia's worst days. But worse than the pallor, worse than the medical equipment crowding her normally pristine office, was the blood on her skirt. James was beside her before conscious thought intervened. Victoria, what happened? The female paramedic intercepted him with a hand on his chest, professional but firm. Are you family? I'm the father of her baby. That was enough. The paramedic stepped aside, her expression softening slightly. She's stable, but she's bleeding. We need to transport her to Northwestern Memorial immediately. You can ride with us. James's mouth went dry. The baby... We won't know until the doctors examine her, but time matters. Victoria pulled the oxygen mask down slightly, her voice muffled but audible. James, I'm scared. He took her hand, gripping tight enough to feel her pulse racing against his palm. I know, but you're not alone. The ambulance ride became a sensory assault, sirens wailing, the smell of antiseptic mixing with Victoria's fierce-wet medical jargon flying between the paramedics in a language James only half understood. Victoria kept her eyes closed, but her hand never left his fingers, digging in with desperate strength. James pulled out his phone with his free hand, fumbling to dial Daniel. I need you to pick up Emma from school. Something's happened with Victoria. Daniel's voice carried instant concern. Is she all right? I don't know yet. Just please get Emma. I'll call when I know more. The waiting room at Northwestern Memorial could have been any hospital anywhere. The same institutional beige, the same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead, the same smell of fear and cleaning products. James paced, checking his phone every 30 seconds, as if that would make time move faster, make doctors materialize with good news instead of the devastating alternatives his mind kept constructing. 47 minutes. That's how long he waited before a doctor emerged, still wearing scrubs, her expression carefully neutral in a way that made James's heart hammer against his ribs. Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Catherine Brennan. Miss Hayes asked me to speak with you. She gestured to a quiet corner away from the other families clustered in their own private hells. James followed his legs, feeling disconnected from his body. The bleeding was caused by a subchorionic hematoma, essentially a collection of blood between the uterine wall and the gestational sac. Dr. Brennan's explanation came in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who'd delivered similar news countless times. It's not uncommon in early pregnancy, but it can be serious. James forced the question through his constricted throat. The baby. Baby's heartbeat is still strong, but Ms. Hayes is at high risk for further complications. She's going to need complete bed rest for the foreseeable future, no work, minimal physical activity, constant monitoring. The relief that the baby was alive warred with terror about what came next, about how Victoria would handle being sidelined, about the practical impossibilities of complete bed rest for a woman who ran a Fortune 500 company. Can I see her? She's being moved to a room now. Give us about 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like excavating time from solid rock. James called Daniel back with an update, texted his team that he wouldn't return today, and tried to organize his spiraling thoughts into something resembling a plan. When a nurse finally led him to Victoria's room, he found her propped up in bed with an IV snaking into her arm monitors, beeping their steady confirmation that she and the baby were still here, still fighting. Victoria's eyes found his immediately, and he saw the question before she voiced it. The baby's okay, Dr. Brennan told me. James pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting down hard enough that the legs scraped against linoleum. You scared me. Her laugh came out shaky, edged with hysteria she was barely containing. I scared myself. I was in the middle of a conference call, and suddenly everything went wrong. There was so much blood, James. I thought... He reached for her hand, cutting off the sentence neither of them wanted her to finish. But you didn't. Baby's still there, still fighting. Victoria's eyes went bright, but she blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. Dr. Brennan says I need bed rest, complete bed rest, weeks, maybe months. I can't run a company from bed. The merger negotiations, the product launch, the investor meetings, I have responsibilities. James's voice came out firmer than he felt, channeling a certainty he'd had to manufacture countless times during Julia's illness. You have one responsibility right now, keeping yourself and this baby safe. Everything else can wait. The board won't see it that way. They'll see weakness proof that I can't handle the pressure. Victoria's bitterness cut through the sterile air. I've worked so hard to build credibility in this industry. One pregnancy complication and it all comes crashing down. Then let it crash. The words surprised James with their vehemence. I don't care about the board or the optics or your reputation. I care about you and this baby surviving the next 7 months. Victoria studied his face like she was seeing him for the first time, trying to reconcile this fierce protectiveness with the mild-mannered analyst she'd known for 4 years. When did you become so fierce about this? The moment I heard that heartbeat and realized I wanted this child more than I knew how to explain. James squeezed her hand gently. You're going on bed rest. We'll figure out the work situation. How I can't just disappear for months. His mind was already reorganizing workflows, redistributing responsibilities, mapping out contingency plans. You delegate. Stephen can handle day-to-day operations. I can take on more of your analytical work. We'll set up remote access so you stay informed without the physical stress. You built a strong team, Victoria. Trust them to keep things running, and if the board pushes back, I'll handle the board. Victoria's stare held disbelief in something that might have been hope. You can't fight my battles. Watch me. Dr. Brennan returned with details that transformed abstract concepts into concrete constraints. The hematoma was medium-sized, not the worst she'd seen, but concerning enough to warrant serious precautions. Victoria would stay in the hospital 48 hours for observation. If everything remained stable, she could go home under strict instructions. No stairs, if avoidable bathroom privileges, only everything else happening in bed or on the couch, no lifting, anything heavier than a phone, no stress. The doctor's gaze shifted to James. She's going to need help. Someone to bring meals, assist with basic needs, keep her company, family nearby. Victoria shook her head and James saw vulnerability flash across her features before she could mask it. Parents are in Seattle. I have colleagues, but no one I'd ask to do that. I'll do it. The words came automatically inevitable. Both women turned to him. Victoria's protest arrived on cue. You have a daughter, a job, a life, and you have a baby that needs its mother alive and healthy. We'll make it work. Dr. Brennan nodded approvingly, already moving on to discharge instructions and warning signs. After she left, the silence felt heavier, weighted with everything unspoken. That night, James dozed in an uncomfortable hospital chair while Victoria slept fitfully between nurse checks. He called Emma before her bedtime, keeping his voice cheerful despite fluorescent lights and the constant mechanical symphony of monitors. Emma's question came instantly cutting through his careful optimism. Is Ms. Hayes okay? She's going to be fine, the baby too, but she needs to rest for a while, so I'm going to help take care of her. Like when I had the flu and you stayed home from work? Exactly like that. Emma's voice brightened with an idea. Can I make her a card with drawings that made me feel better when I was sick? James's throat tightened around words that wouldn't quite form. I think she'd love that bug. Tell her I hope she feels better soon, and tell the baby to be good and not scare everyone. I will. Love you. Love you too, Dad. The next morning brought a parade of doctors and tests. Everything looked stable. Bleeding had stopped baby's heartbeat strong at 164 beats per minute. Victoria's vitals good. By afternoon, Dr. Brennan cleared her for discharge with stern reminders about the bed rest requirements. I'm serious about this. No cheating. Your body needs time to heal, and that baby needs a stable environment to grow. Push yourself too hard, and we could be looking at a very different outcome. The words hung heavy as James drove Victoria to her apartment, watching her stare out the window with one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. I keep thinking about all the things I need to do, emails I need to send, decisions that need to be made. Her voice was barely audible. And then I think about what Dr. Brennan said about pushing too hard, and I get terrified all over again. James navigated through midday traffic, choosing his words carefully. So, we take it one day at a time, 1 hour if that's all you can manage. Getting Victoria settled felt surreal, this woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, now relegated to a couch dependent on others for basic needs. James brought pillows from her bedroom, arranged them so she could recline comfortably, filled water bottles, organized medications, set her phone and laptop within easy reach. This is going to drive me crazy. Victoria's frustration leaked through despite her obvious effort at control. Just sitting here. Then we'll find ways to make it bearable. Books, movies work in small doses when you feel up to it. James pulled up a chair. Emma wants to make you cards. She'll probably send one every day if I let her. Something in Victoria's expression softened, the executive armor cracking to reveal genuine emotion underneath. She's a sweet kid. She's worried about you, about the baby. James paused, weighing whether to share Emma's insight. She asked me last night if the baby was scared when you got sick. What did you tell her? That the baby was safe because you were being brave. Victoria's eyes went bright with unshed tears. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified and out of control and completely useless. Brave doesn't mean not scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. James leaned forward. You're choosing to protect this baby even though it's costing you everything you've worked for. That's the definition of bravery. Before Victoria could respond, Stephen Brooks appeared at her apartment door at 8 the next morning, his usually friendly face tight with concern that immediately set James on edge. Stephen had been Victoria's COO for 5 years, her right hand in building Summit Tech into what it was today. His presence here now meant the trouble James had sensed gathering had arrived. The board called an emergency meeting. Stephen didn't waste time on pleasantries. They want to discuss interim leadership given your medical situation. Victoria sat up straighter on the couch, ignoring James's warning look. What did you tell them? That you're recovering and will provide updates as appropriate. Stephen's glance toward James carried apology and frustration in equal measure. But Victoria, they're nervous. Hamilton is already making noise about this being a sign of instability in leadership. Victoria's voice came out sharp as broken glass. Hamilton has wanted my job since the Seattle merger fell through. This has nothing to do with actual concern. I know that, but optics matter. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. No offense, but having Ms. Hayes, senior analyst, playing nursemaid isn't helping the perception that she's in control. James kept his voice flat, refusing to take the bait. I don't care about perception. I care about her health. I understand. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. Stephen turned back to Victoria. The board wants a conference call tomorrow. They want assurances that the company won't suffer during your recovery. After Stephen left, silence settled over the apartment like ash after a fire. James could see Victoria's mind working, calculating angles and strategies, even from her horizontal position. Don't, he said quietly. Don't sacrifice your health to prove a point to the board. They'll respect you or they won't, but you can't control that from here. Victoria's frustration boiled over. If I show weakness now, I'll never recover my position. They'll use this pregnancy as evidence that I can't handle the pressure that women executives are a liability. I've seen it happen to other women in this industry. One personal crisis and suddenly they're encouraged to step back, take a less demanding role, let the men handle the important decisions. James understood her fear had watched similar dynamics play out throughout his career, but he also knew that her life and their baby's life were worth more than any corporate title. Then we fight that battle when you're healthy enough to fight it properly. Right now, you focus on staying pregnant. That's the only thing that matters. Later that day, James was called into a meeting with Robert Thornton, his department head, and a man he'd always respected for his straightforward management style. The meeting request had come without explanation, marked only as urgent, and James felt dread coiling in his stomach as he walked to Thornton's office. Robert gestured him to a chair, his expression carrying a discomfort that made James's pulse quicken. "James, I need to talk to you about the senior director position." The promotion. James had been under consideration for months. His track record was excellent. His team respected him. The position felt like a natural next step. More importantly, it came with a 40% salary increase and equity stake. He'd been counting on that money, planning to use the extra income for Emma's college fund for the financial cushion that single parenthood required. The selection committee met yesterday. Robert's pause stretched too long. They've decided to go with another candidate. James felt the gut punch but kept his face neutral. Years of corporate politics teaching him to never show weakness. "Can I ask why?" Robert's discomfort intensified. Officially, they felt the other candidate had more focused availability for the increased responsibilities. Unofficially, a sigh that carried genuine regret. "James, you're excellent at your job, but you've missed 3 executive meetings in the last 2 weeks. You're leaving early most days, and word is you're involved in a complicated personal situation with senior leadership. They're concerned about your judgment and your ability to maintain professional boundaries." The words landed like blows, each one a consequence of choices James didn't regret but couldn't afford. "I see. For what it's worth, I advocated for you. I think you're the best person for the job." Robert's sincerity was evident. "But the committee felt this situation presents too many potential conflicts." James thanked him mechanically and left, making it to his car in the parking garage before the full weight hit him. He sat behind the wheel, running calculations in his head. Medical bills from Victoria's hospital stay, his own expenses for Emma, the baby coming with all its costs, and now no promotion to offset any of it. The 40% increase he'd been counting on had just evaporated, leaving him staring at a budget that wouldn't stretch far enough. He'd known there would be consequences to his choices. Knowing abstractly and facing the concrete reality proved to be entirely different things. James pulled out his phone, looked at the photo of Victoria from the hospital, at the ultrasound image of their daughter. The sacrifice was real, tangible, measured in dollars he couldn't afford to lose. But looking at those images, he knew he'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Some things were worth more than money. Some battles were worth losing. He didn't tell Victoria about the promotion when he returned to her apartment that evening. She had enough to worry about. He'd figure out the finances somehow, had always managed before would manage now. Pride didn't pay bills, but neither did burdening Victoria with guilt over choices that were his to make. The conference call happened the next day, and James sat beside Victoria at her insistence, listening as board members questioned her ability to lead while on medical leave. They suggested temporary replacements, hinted that perhaps this was a sign she needed to reconsider her priorities, wrapped their sexism in corporate speak that fooled no one. Victoria handled it with her usual composure, voice steady, even as James watched her grip the phone hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She outlined a clear delegation plan, identified key personnel for day-to-day operations, firmly rejected any suggestion of stepping down. "I'm on bed rest, not in a coma. I can still think, still strategize, still lead this company. What I can't do is compromise my health or my pregnancy to satisfy your concerns about optics." The pause that followed crackled with tension. Then Richard Hamilton's voice cut through, dripping with the kind of condescension that made James's hands curl into fists. "With all due respect, Victoria, this situation raises questions about your judgment. Getting pregnant at this stage in your career by a subordinate no less suggests a lack of professionalism that concerns me." James felt Victoria stiffen beside him. Before she could respond, he leaned toward the phone, knowing this would cost him, but unable to stay silent. "This is James Carter. I'd like to address that comment. What happened between Ms. Hayes and me is personal and none of the board's business, but since you've made it relevant to this discussion, let me be clear. We are two adults who made a choice. Ms. Hayes' pregnancy doesn't diminish her capability any more than my being a father diminishes mine. If this board is going to judge her fitness to lead based on her personal life rather than her 20-year track record of success, then the problem isn't with her judgment, it's with yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at him like he'd grown a second head shock, and something else, gratitude maybe, or fear for what he'd just done, warring across her features. Hamilton recovered first, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Carter, this is a board meeting. Your input wasn't requested." James kept his voice level, channeling every ounce of controlled fury into calm delivery. "Then you shouldn't have made it about me. Ms. Hayes has built this company from nothing. She's navigated economic downturns, hostile takeover attempts, industry disruption. A pregnancy complication doesn't change any of that. If you can't see past your own biases to recognize her value, that's your failure, not hers. Another board member, Barbara Westfield, spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in boardrooms longer than most of them had been alive. Mr. Carter makes a valid point. Victoria's track record speaks for itself. I move that we accept her delegation plan and table this discussion until there's actual evidence of operational problems. The vote was close, but it passed. After the call ended, Victoria sat in stunned silence, and James could practically hear her recalculating everything she thought she knew about corporate politics and personal boundaries. You just told off my board of directors. They deserved it. James, you could lose your job for that. Hamilton has enough influence to make your life very difficult. He'd already lost the promotion, but didn't say so. Let him try. I'm tired of watching people treat you like you're less capable because you're pregnant. You're still the smartest person in every room. Bed rest doesn't change that. Victoria was crying now, not the frustrated tears from before, but something deeper, something that looked like a dam breaking after years of holding back. No one's ever defended me like that. I've always had to fight my own battles. You're not alone anymore. Get used to it. Days settled into a rhythm that James hadn't expected to feel sustainable, but somehow did. He worked from Victoria's apartment in the mornings, laptop set up at her dining table while she rested on the couch. They'd conference call into meetings together, her voice as sharp and commanding as ever, even from her horizontal position. Afternoons, he'd pick up Emma from school and bring her to visit his daughter's cheerful energy filling the pristine apartment with life. Emma took her role as baby's big sister with endearing seriousness. She brought drawing solar systems with tiny stick figures labeled baby standing on each planet. She read from her science textbook explaining photosynthesis and gravity to Victoria's stomach. She asked endless questions that sent James frantically Googling answers. Does the baby have eyes yet? When the baby comes out, will they be grumpy from sleeping too long? Victoria smiled at these visits, and James realized they were becoming the highlight of her days. Emma had a gift for making the unbearable bearable, for finding joy in the smallest moments. 3 weeks into bed, rest brought the 16-week ultrasound appointment. James had arranged for Daniel to watch Emma at school, wanting this moment to be just for them, him and Victoria, and whatever they were about to learn. Dr. Rebecca Whitmore greeted them with her usual professional warmth, reviewing Victoria's chart with practiced efficiency. Bed rest seems to be working. How are you feeling? Bored, restless, but the bleeding hasn't returned. That's what we want to hear. Let's see how this little one is doing. The ultrasound gel was cold against Victoria's skin, now showing the slightest curve of pregnancy. The screen flickered to life, and James felt his breath catch. The baby was so much larger than at 11 weeks, recognizably human now, with clearly defined features, arms and legs moving in slow motion, a profile that made his chest ache. Dr. Whitmore pointed out details with evident pleasure. There's the spine, very straight and healthy, 4 chambers of the heart all functioning beautifully, and oh, baby's being cooperative today. She adjusted the wand, bringing a new angle into view. Do you want to know the sex? Victoria looked at James, the question unspoken but clear in her eyes. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned for this moment, but the answer felt inevitable. Yes, they said simultaneously. Dr. Whitmore's smile widened. Congratulations, you're having a girl. The words hung in the air, transforming the future from abstract to achingly specific. A daughter, another daughter. James felt something crack open in his chest, joy and terror in equal measure, the weight of responsibility multiplying even as his capacity for love expanded beyond what he'd thought possible. Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A girl! We're having a girl! James couldn't speak past the emotion lodging in his throat, could only watch the screen as their daughter moved inside Victoria, oblivious to the lives she was already changing just by existing. Dr. Whitmore printed images and made notes, talking about the next appointment and continued vigilance, but James barely heard. His mind was already racing ahead, pink paint for a nursery, teaching another little girl about the world, watching Emma become the big sister she was already so eager to be. When they left the clinic, Victoria clutched the ultrasound photos with reverent care. A daughter. I keep trying to imagine what she'll be like. Will she have your eyes, my stubbornness? Probably both, along with Emma's big heart and your brilliant mind. Victoria laughed, and James heard hope in it for the first time since the bleeding scare. They sat in his car in the parking lot, neither ready to return to the constraints of their separate realities. I'm terrified, Victoria admitted quietly. Me too, but we'll figure it out. We always do. 6 weeks later, at 22 weeks, everything shifted again. James was working on a quarterly report when Victoria called his name from the couch, something urgent in her tone that made him abandon his laptop immediately. What's wrong? Are you in pain? Victoria's face held wonder instead of fear, her hand pressed flat against her now prominent belly. She's moving, really moving, not just flutters anymore. I can feel her kicking. She reached for his hand, placing it where hers had been. James held his breath, waiting. Then he felt it, a distinct push against his palm, unmistakable and profound. Their daughter announcing her presence. There, Victoria whispered. Did you feel that? I felt it. James's voice came out rough with emotion. With Emma, he'd missed this moment. Julia had been alone when she'd first felt their daughter move, and by the time she'd called him home from work, the movement had stopped. He'd experienced it later, of course, but never this first awareness, this initial proof of life asserting itself. The baby moved again, stronger this time, and Victoria laughed, a sound of pure joy James had never heard from her before. She's really in there. All this time I knew it intellectually, saw the ultrasounds, heard the heartbeat. But this is different. This is her saying hello. James kept his hand where it was, feeling their daughter move beneath his palm, and something fundamental shifted in his understanding of what they were building together. Not just co-parenting, not just a partnership of convenience, but something real and lasting and terrifyingly important. That evening, after Victoria fell asleep on the couch, James finally opened the envelope he'd been avoiding all week. Medical bills from her hospital stay, $8,400 even after insurance, plus Emma's summer camp deposit, non-refundable, $1,200, plus rent due in 10 days. $2,100. He did the math in his head. Checking account had $4,200 savings earmarked for Emma's college, held $12,000. But touching that felt like failing Julia credit card, already carrying $3,000 from Emma's emergency appendectomy last year. Without the promotion he'd lost, this was unsustainable. The baby coming meant formula diapers, clothes, childcare expenses that would only multiply. James felt panic rising, but pushed it down, knowing that panic solved nothing. He stepped outside Victoria's apartment to make a call he'd hoped to avoid. Daniel answered on the second ring. Hey, James, everything okay? Yeah, mostly. Listen, I need to ask you something. I need to borrow some money. How much? 5,000. I'll pay you back. I just need a few months. Daniel cut him off with immediate assurance. Of course, I'll transfer it tomorrow. You don't need to explain. But James did explain the hospital bills, the lost promotion he hadn't told anyone about, the baby coming, and the financial reality that didn't care about his good intentions. Daniel listened without interruption, then delivered his verdict. James, you're doing an incredible thing. Taking responsibility like this, Rachel would be proud of you. James's throat tightened around words that wouldn't form. I'm not sure about that. I'm barely keeping my head above water. You're keeping your head above water while taking care of two kids and a woman carrying your child. That's more than most men could do. And James, don't be too proud to ask for help. You've got people who care about you. The validation helped, but it didn't change the numbers. James went back inside, looked at Victoria sleeping peacefully at the curve of her belly where their daughter grew, and made peace with the fact that some sacrifices were worth making even when they hurt. Emma's shift in behavior started subtly quieter than usual, less enthusiastic about visiting Victoria, answering, I guess so, when James asked if she wanted to go, instead of her usual eagerness. 3 days later, her teacher pulled James aside at pickup. Emma's been a bit distracted lately, not participating as much in class. Is everything all right at home? James reassured her. They were going through changes, promised to talk to Emma, and spent the drive home trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation. That evening, making dinner in their own kitchen for the first time in days, Emma finally broke. Do you even remember my science fair is tomorrow? James froze, and in that frozen moment, he saw the truth written across his daughter's face he'd completely forgotten. Emma was supposed to present her solar system project, had been working on it for weeks. He'd promised to help her practice her presentation tonight. Emma, I'm so sorry. Her face crumpled, 7 years of holding herself together, finally breaking apart. You promised you'd help me practice. You promised lots of things, but then you're always with her. You love the baby more than me. You love Ms. Hayes more than me. I hate the baby. She ran to her room door, slamming with enough force to rattle the walls. James stood in the kitchen, frozen by the realization that his worst fear had manifested. Emma feeling displaced, unloved, exactly what he'd sworn would never happen. He gave her a minute to cry, then went to her room and knocked softly. Bug, can I come in? Go away. Emma, I need to talk to you, please. Long silence, then a grudging, fine. James entered to find Emma face down on her bed, shoulders shaking. He sat on the edge of the mattress, hand on her back, and let her cry herself out before speaking. You're right. I forgot about your science fair. I broke my promise, and that's not okay. I'm really, really sorry. Emma rolled over, face blotchy from crying. You're always with her now. You're gone all the time. And when you are here, you're on the phone with her. And the baby isn't even born yet, and you already love it more. James pulled her into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it, feeling her small frame against his chest, her heartbeat racing with hurt and anger. Emma, listen to me. I don't love the baby more than you. I could never love anyone more than you. You're my first girl, my bug, the person who made me a father. The baby is important, yes, and Ms. Hayes needs help right now because she's sick, but that doesn't mean you're less important. Emma sniffled against his shirt. It feels like I'm less important. I know, and I'm sorry I made you feel that way. From now on, we're going to have special time. Just you and me. No Victoria, no baby talk, just us. I promise, and I'm going to keep this promise. He held her for a long moment, then pulled back to meet her eyes. Now let's practice your presentation. We're going to make it so good that Mr. Peterson gives you first place. Jason, they spent the next 2 hours running through her presentation until Emma's confidence returned, until she was excited again instead of hurt. By bedtime, she was herself crisis averted, but James knew this was just the beginning. Balancing Emma's needs against Victoria's, managing his daughter's emotional landscape while supporting a woman carrying his child, it was a tightrope walk that would only get harder. After Emma was asleep, James texted Victoria, "I need to cut back on time at your place. Emma's struggling." Victoria's response came immediately. "Of course, is she okay?" "She will be, but I need to be more present for her." "I understand. Take care of your daughter. The baby and I will be fine." "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being an amazing father." James sat in the dark of his living room thinking about the choices that had led here, about the life he was building from fragments of intention and accident. Victoria carrying his daughter Emma, learning to share her father's love, his own heart expanding to hold more than he'd thought possible while his bank account shrank beyond what felt manageable. But looking at Emma's peaceful face through her bedroom door, remembering the feel of their daughter moving under his hand, he knew these were the right choices, even when they were the hard ones. Some things were worth fighting for, some battles were worth the cost. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to be present for Emma while supporting Victoria. Tomorrow he'd make the money stretch further than it wanted to go. Tomorrow he'd find a way to be enough for everyone who depended on him. Tonight he just let himself feel the weight of it all, the fear and the love and the impossible hope that somehow against all odds they'd make this work. The following weeks found James more intentional about balance. Wednesday evenings became sacred. Emma and Dad, night marked on the calendar in purple marker, inviolable. They cooked together, played board games, watched movies with popcorn and commentary about scientific inaccuracies that Emma loved to catalog. Her mood improved dramatically, the shadow of abandonment fear receding as James proved through action that her place in his life remained unshakable. Victoria's apartment visits shortened but intensified. James still helped daily, but in focused bursts, making sure she ate properly, reviewing critical documents, providing the human contact that bed rest threatened to strip away. They'd found an equilibrium that felt precarious but functional, like balancing on a wire strung between what was and what might be. Emma's science fair brought second place, and a trophy she displayed with pride bordering on reverence. She showed it to Victoria that weekend, talking rapid fire about orbital mechanics and Mr. Peterson's praise, and James watched something shift in the dynamic between them. Victoria asked genuine questions, listened with real interest, and Emma responded by climbing onto the couch, carefully mindful of the baby, to show Victoria her latest drawings. "I made this one for Lily," Emma announced, presenting a sketch of two stick figures holding hands beneath a moon. "That's me and her. I'm going to teach her all the constellations." Victoria's voice went soft. "Lily." James felt his chest tighten. They hadn't discussed names yet, hadn't gotten that far in their planning, but hearing it from Emma's mouth made the baby real in a new way, not just their daughter, but Lily, a person with an identity emerging before she'd even arrived. "Do you like it?" Emma looked between them anxiously. "I thought Lily was pretty, and it sounds like light, which is important for space." Victoria reached out and pulled Emma into a hug that surprised all three of them. "I love it. Lily is perfect." Week 30 arrived with autumn settling over Chicago, the lake turning steel gray under October skies. James had moved more of his things into Victoria's apartment, incrementally clothes in her guest closet toiletries, in the bathroom, his coffee mug beside hers in the kitchen. The boundaries between his life and hers were dissolving, and neither of them seemed inclined to reinforce them. Late one evening, after Emma had gone to sleep in what had become her permanent room at Victoria's, James and Victoria sat together in the living room. She was on the couch per doctor's orders, but James had pulled his chair close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Victoria's admission came quietly, her hand resting on the significant swell of her belly. James deflected with practiced ease. "You'd be fine. You're the strongest person I know." Victoria caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "James, can I tell you something?" The seriousness in her tone made his pulse quicken. "Of course." She took a breath, held it, released it slowly, like she was preparing for a dive into deep water. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what this is. We started as co-parents. That was the agreement. But somewhere along the way, it became more, at least for me." James's heart hammered against his ribs, hope and fear tangling until he couldn't separate them. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have feelings for you, real feelings, not gratitude or convenience or proximity." Victoria met his eyes directly. "I look forward to seeing you every day. I miss you when you're gone. I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone, but I also know this is complicated. We work together. There's a baby coming, Emma to consider. And maybe you don't feel the same way," which is, James cut her off by kissing her, the gesture born of impulse and certainty in equal measure. gentle, careful, mindful of her pregnant body, but carrying every emotion he'd been holding back for months. When they broke apart, both were crying. I've been in love with you for weeks, maybe months. James's voice came out rough with feeling. I kept telling myself it was just responsibility, just doing the right thing. But it's not. It's never been just that. I love how brilliant you are, how you listen when Emma talks about space. I love your terrible jokes when you're nervous, the way you touch your belly when you think no one's watching. I love that you're terrified but doing it anyway. I love you, Victoria, not just the baby, not just the idea of family, you. Victoria's composure shattered completely, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to do this, how to be in a relationship. I've spent my whole life alone. Then we'll figure it out together, same way we figure out everything else. They sat in the dark holding hands while Lily moved between them, and James felt the future solidifying from abstract possibility into concrete reality. This wasn't just co parenting anymore. This was building a life, choosing each other deliberately and completely. This is going to be complicated, Victoria whispered. The best things usually are. They talked into the early hours, making plans that felt equal parts terrifying and inevitable. James's lease was up in 2 months. What if he moved in officially? Victoria worried about the optics, about what the board would say, but James was done caring about corporate politics. He'd already transferred to the analytics division to avoid conflict of interest. They could be open about their relationship, let people think what they wanted. I don't want to hide this, James insisted. I don't want our daughter growing up thinking her parents were ashamed of loving each other. Victoria studied his face in the dim light. When did you get so brave? When I realized what I'd lose if I stayed scared. 4 days later, at 34 weeks, everything changed. It was Wednesday evening, late, James working through Victoria's maternity leave transition plan while she shifted restlessly on the couch. Emma slept in her room down the hall door, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars she and Victoria had stuck up together last weekend. The apartment had transformed from sterile showcase to lived-in home evidence of their merged lives scattered across every surface. Victoria had been complaining about her back all day, dismissing it as normal third trimester discomfort. Dr. Whitmore had warned that the final weeks would be physically demanding, especially combined with prolonged bed rest. James had suggested calling the doctor twice, but Victoria had insisted she was fine, just uncomfortable. Then she gasped, hand flying to her belly, face draining of color in a way that made James abandon his laptop immediately. What's wrong? Is it the baby? I don't know. Something felt. Another gasp cut off her words, and she doubled over as far as her pregnant belly allowed. Oh, no, 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 no. James saw the wetness spreading across the couch cushions at the same moment Victoria did, understanding, arriving with nauseating clarity. Her water had broken 6 weeks early. We need to go to the hospital now. He was already moving, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed optimistically at 30 weeks, pulling out his phone to call for help. Victoria's voice came out, strangled with panic. It's too early. She's not supposed to come for 6 more weeks. James, something's wrong. He kept his voice steady through sheer force of will, channeling the calm he'd learned during Julia's illness, when panic helped no one. She's going to be fine. You're both going to be fine. Can you stand? Victoria nodded, letting him help her to her feet. Another contraction hit, and she gripped his arm hard enough that he'd find bruises tomorrow. Emma, we can't leave Emma alone. James was already dialing Daniel with one hand while supporting Victoria with the other. I need you here immediately. Victoria's in labor. I need you to stay with Emma while I take her to the hospital. Daniel's response came without hesitation. I'm 10 minutes away. Go. The drive to Northwestern Memorial blurred into fragments of controlled chaos, Victoria's breathing exercises between contractions, James's knuckles white on the steering wheel, the city lights streaming past like tracer fire. He kept one hand in hers, talking in a steady stream of reassurance he wasn't sure either of them believed. You're doing great. Just keep breathing. Almost there. Everything's going to be fine. Victoria's response came through gritted teeth. You don't know that. Babies born this early can have complications, breathing problems, developmental delays, infections. They can also be completely healthy. Emma was born at 36 weeks, and she's perfect. Another contraction stronger this time, and James had to focus on the road as Victoria squeezed his hand with desperate strength. We're here. Hold on. The emergency room staff had been alerted by Victoria's OB and were waiting with a wheelchair. They whisked her away immediately while James dealt with admissions paperwork, his hands shaking so badly he could barely sign his name. By the time he was allowed into the labor and delivery ward, Victoria was already in a hospital gown hooked to monitors, showing their daughter's heartbeat and contractions coming with increasing frequency. Dr. Catherine Brennan was there, not Dr. Whitmore, but a specialist in high-risk deliveries, her presence suggesting the situation was more serious than James wanted to acknowledge. She was reviewing Victoria's chart with the kind of focused intensity that made his stomach drop. The baby's in distress. Heart rate is dropping with each contraction. Dr. Brennan's delivery was clinical efficient, leaving no room for false comfort. We need to do an emergency C-section. Victoria's voice came out sharp with fear. No, I wanted natural birth. We discussed this. I know, but things have changed. Your daughter needs to come out now, and she needs to come out safely. Dr. Brennan touched Victoria's shoulder with surprising gentleness. I need your consent, Victoria. We're running out of time. Victoria looked at James, terror naked in her eyes, and he moved to her side, immediately taking her hand. It's going to be okay. They know what they're doing. Our girl is going to be fine. Victoria gripped his hand like a lifeline, her voice breaking. Promise me, if something goes wrong, if you have to choose, you save the baby. You hear me, you save her. James thought about Julia's final days, about promises he'd made that circumstances had rendered meaningless, about the hubris of thinking he could control outcomes when biology followed its own rules. Nothing's going to go wrong. But even as he said it, he knew he couldn't guarantee anything. You're both going to be fine. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Carter, if you want to be present for the surgery, you need to scrub in now. Everything moved with frightening speed after that. James was handed scrubs shown to a sink where he scrubbed his hands until they were raw. By the time he entered the operating room, Victoria was already on the table, a blue curtain blocking her view of her own abdomen, her body reduced to a medical problem to be solved through precise cuts and careful extraction. He took his position at her head, finding her hand immediately. She was shaking despite the warm blankets piled on her, and James leaned close, speaking directly into her ear. I'm scared. Her admission came barely above a whisper. I know. Me too. But we're in this together, remember? In a few minutes we're going to meet our daughter. Focus on that. The surgery took less than 10 minutes but stretched like hours. James kept his eyes on Victoria's face, not wanting to see what was happening beyond the curtain, and talked to her in a continuous stream, reminding her of Emma's excitement about being a big sister, the nursery they'd finally set up last week, all the dreams they'd built around this baby who was about to arrive, whether they were ready or not. Then he heard it, a thin, reedy cry that was the most beautiful sound in the world. It's a girl, Dr. Brennan announced, though they'd known that for months. Small but fierce, just like her mother. James felt tears streaming down his face as a nurse brought their daughter over, wrapped in blankets and wearing a tiny hat. She was impossibly small, her face scrunched red, her fists waving in indignation at being pulled from her warm home into this bright, cold world. Victoria, look at her. She's perfect. Victoria turned her head, and the sound she made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She's so small. 4 pounds, 3 ounces, the nurse confirmed. Her lungs sound strong. We'll need to take her to the NICU for observation, given her gestational age, but she's breathing on her own. That's an excellent sign. Victoria's voice came out desperate. Can I hold her? Please, just for a second. The nurse placed Lily against Victoria's chest for a brief moment, and James watched as his daughter opened eyes that were dark and indeterminate blue, seeming to focus on her mother's face with an intensity that stole his breath. Hi, baby. Hi, Lily, we've been waiting for you. All too soon, the nurse had to take Lily to the NICU for assessment. James watched them go, his heart following that tiny bundle, even as he stayed with Victoria while they finished the surgery. The fear that had been a constant hum since Victoria's water broke shifted into something more specific, not whether their daughter would survive, but what challenges she might face in the weeks ahead. Victoria drifted in and out of sleep and recovery while James sat beside her, unable to rest. His phone buzzed with a message from Daniel confirming Emma was asleep and asking for updates. James sent back a photo of Victoria sleeping, adding, "You have a baby sister, Lily Rachel. She's in NICU, but doing well." Emma's response was immediate, all caps enthusiasm. Can I come see her? Tomorrow, Bug. Let your new sister settle in first. Okay, but I'm so excited I might explode. James smiled despite his exhaustion, imagining Emma's face when she met Lily, already planning how to explain NICU protocols to a 7-year-old who would want to hold her sister immediately. Dr. Brennan appeared a few hours later with an update that James had been simultaneously dreading and desperate for. She's stable and doing well. Breathing without assistance, maintaining her temperature, taking small amounts of formula. She'll need to stay in NICU for monitoring probably 2 to 3 weeks given her prematurity, but I'm optimistic about her progress. Relief hit James like a physical force, making his knees weak. Can we see her once Victoria is cleared from recovery? Absolutely. But when Victoria was finally wheeled to the NICU, they scrubbed in with the thoroughness of surgeons, then were shown to an isolette where their daughter lay beneath warming lights. She looked even smaller, surrounded by medical equipment monitors, tracking her every breath and heartbeat, technology keeping watch over this fragile new life. Victoria reached through the porthole, her finger stroking Lily's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around hers, and Victoria started crying again. She's holding my hand. James put his arm around Victoria's shoulders, both of them transfixed. She knows her mama. They stayed for hours, taking turns reaching in to touch their daughter, memorizing every detail of her face. When Victoria finally had to return to her room for rest, she went reluctantly looking back at the isolette until it disappeared from view. Emma arrived the next morning with Daniel armed with drawings and a stuffed giraffe nearly as big as she was. Her eyes went wide when she saw Lily through the NICU glass. "She's so tiny, Dad. She's like a little doll." James lifted Emma so she could see better. "She'll get bigger. You were small like that once, too." "Can I hold her?" "Not yet, Bug. She needs to stay warm and monitored for a while, but you can talk to her. The nurses say babies can hear familiar voices." Emma pressed close to the glass, her face serious with the weight of responsibility. Hi, Lily. I'm your big sister, Emma. I brought you a giraffe because giraffes are the best animals. They can see really far because they're so tall and they have purple tongues, which is cool. When you're bigger, I'm going to teach you about space and how to read and everything you need to know about being awesome. James watched his daughters, one chattering excitedly, one sleeping peacefully in her isolette, and felt his heart expand beyond what he'd thought anatomically possible. This was his family now, complicated and unconventional and absolutely perfect. Victoria was released from the hospital 3 days later, though Lily remained in NICU. The transition was brutal in ways James hadn't fully anticipated. Leaving the hospital without her baby felt fundamentally wrong to Victoria, a violation of some primal instinct that motherhood had awakened. She cried the entire drive to her apartment, and James held her hand, understanding in a way only another parent could the particular cruelty of this separation. They fell into a new routine built around NICU visiting hours. Mornings, James took Emma to school, then met Victoria at the hospital where they'd spend hours with Lily. Afternoons, they worked remotely from the NICU waiting room, staying close in case the nurses needed them. Evenings, Emma joined for brief visits before bedtime, reading her science textbook to Lily. Through the isolette walls, convinced her sister could hear and benefit from early education. Day by day, Lily grew stronger. She graduated from the isolette to an open crib, a milestone that made Victoria sob with relief. She started taking more formula, her tiny body filling out incrementally. She gained weight, 4 pounds 6 ounces, then 4 pounds 12, then 5 pounds 2, each ounce celebrated like a major victory. She maintained her temperature without assistance. The warming lights turned off one by one. The monitors came off gradually until she was breathing room air with no support, just a baby instead of a patient. On day 17, Dr. Brennan gave them the news they'd been waiting for with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Lily is ready to go home. Victoria burst into tears. James just held her, his own eyes suspiciously bright, while Emma jumped up and down, shrieking with joy loud enough that a nurse had to remind her this was a hospital. The drive home with Lily was the most terrifying experience of James's life, and he'd done it before with Emma. Every bump felt catastrophic, every other car too close, every traffic light a potential disaster. Victoria sat in the back with the car seat, her hand resting protectively on Lily's chest, feeling her breathe, counting each breath like precious currency. Emma had insisted on decorating Victoria's apartment with welcome home signs and balloons in shades of pink and purple. When they walked in with Lily, she presented her sister with a carefully wrapped gift, a mobile of planets and stars to hang over her crib, so she can learn about space while she sleeps. That night, after Emma had gone to sleep and Lily was settled in the bassinet beside Victoria's bed, James and Victoria sat together on the couch they'd occupied for so many months. The couch where this had all begun, where they'd navigated bed rest and fear and the slow transformation from co-parents to something more. We did it. Victoria's head rested on James's shoulder, exhaustion and relief in equal measure. We actually did it. You had doubts. So many doubts. I thought I'd be terrible at this, that I'd panic the first time she cried, or mess up feeding her, or drop her, or any of the thousand catastrophes I imagined. Victoria laughed softly. And she cried an hour ago, and I didn't panic. I just picked her up and held her until she settled. It felt natural, like maybe I can actually do this. I told you that you could. Victoria lifted her head to look at him, something shifting in her expression. You've told me a lot of things over the past months, that I wasn't alone, that I could be both a CEO and a mother, that you loved me. I didn't believe most of them at the time. She kissed him softly. And now I believe all of them. I love you, James Carter. I love the way you show up, the way you fight for what matters, the way you made me believe I deserve to be fought for. You do deserve it. You deserve everything. From the bedroom, Lily made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a sleepy protest. They both froze listening, but she settled back into sleep without intervention. I should probably be in there close in case she needs me. Victoria started to stand, but James caught her hand. We should probably be in there. Victoria studied his face in the dim light. Are you asking to stay the night, or are you asking for more than that? I'm asking for whatever you're willing to give. One night or every night, your choice. Victoria's response came without hesitation. Every night. I want every night, James. I want to wake up with you beside me and fall asleep knowing you're there. I want Emma running through the apartment and Lily crying at 2 a.m. and all the messy, complicated reality of actually being a family. Then that's what we'll have. They moved to the bedroom, James settling beside Victoria in the bed where he'd never slept before, despite all the nights he'd spent in her apartment. Lily slept in her bassinet within arm's reach, her tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths that were the most beautiful sight James had ever witnessed. In the darkness, Victoria's voice came quietly. I need to tell you something about work. James tensed slightly, sensing the weight behind her words. What about it? I've been thinking about what you said about Julia and how you regretted all the time you spent chasing career advancement instead of being present, about how none of that mattered when she got sick. Victoria turned to face him, her features barely visible in the ambient light from the hallway. I don't want to have those regrets. I don't want to miss Lily's childhood because I was too focused on board meetings and quarterly reports. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to step back, not quit. I love Summit Tech too much for that, but I'm going to restructure my role, delegate more work, reasonable hours instead of 60-hour weeks, actually use my parental leave instead of checking emails from the hospital. She took his hand. I built that company to create something meaningful, but this, you and Emma and Lily, this is what's actually meaningful. I don't want to sacrifice it for anything. James pulled her closer, mindful of her still healing incision. The board might not like that. The board can adjust or replace me. Either way, I'll be fine. Victoria smiled in the darkness. You were right about something else, too. If I lost Summit Tech, I could build something new, but I can't build a new family. This is irreplaceable. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. James kissed her, then long and slow and full of promise for everything that came next. When they broke apart, Lily was making small sounds that meant she'd be demanding food soon. I'll get her, James offered, but Victoria was already moving. We'll get her together. And that James thought while watching Victoria lift their daughter from the bassinet with capable hands that had learned this choreography in just 17 days was the perfect metaphor for everything they'd built. Through crisis and fear and uncertainty, they'd created something real and lasting, not despite the complications, but because they'd faced them together. 6 months transformed chaos into something resembling normal. Victoria had restructured her role at Summit Tech, focusing on strategy while Stephen handled daily operations. The board had grumbled initially, but when the company's performance didn't suffer, actually improved under the distributed leadership model, even Richard Hamilton had grudgingly backed down. James had settled fully into Victoria's apartment, his old lease a distant memory. Emma's room was decorated with space posters and physics equations she'd started learning from YouTube videos. Lily's nursery held the mobile Emma had given her, planets spinning slowly above a crib that rarely stayed empty long enough to appreciate. One Saturday in June, Chicago spread out in perfect summer glory beneath Victoria's windows. James woke to find Victoria already awake beside him, watching him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. What? He reached for her, pulling her close. Marry me. James blinked, certain he'd misheard. What? Victoria propped herself up on one elbow, her expression serious. I want to marry you, James Carter. I want to make this official, permanent, irrevocable. I want Emma and Lily to grow up knowing their parents chose each other deliberately and completely. I want to stop explaining to people that yes, we live together and yes, we have a baby, but no, we're not married, as if that somehow diminishes what we have. James felt emotion clog his throat, making words difficult. You're proposing to me. I'm proposing to us, to our family, to building a life that doesn't require qualifiers or explanations. Victoria's voice carried certainty he'd come to recognize as her trademark. So what do you say? Will you marry me? James reached into the nightstand drawer, pulling out the small box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment that had apparently arrived on its own terms. I was going to ask you today, actually. He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. I bought this 2 weeks ago. I've been waiting for the perfect moment, but I realize now there's no perfect moment. There's just now, and us, and this choice we keep making. Victoria Hayes, will you marry me? Victoria laughed through tears, reaching for the ring, even as she pulled him into a kiss. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. They lay there for a while longer, planning in whispered voices while Lily slept and Emma dreamed down the hall. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. Nothing elaborate, they'd both been through enough drama for one relationship. Simple vows, honest promises, a beginning that acknowledged how far they'd already come. The wedding happened on a Saturday in June at Victoria's apartment, the same space where they'd navigated bed rest and fear and the slow building of trust. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake, sunlight streaming in to illuminate the small gathering. Daniel, Stephen, Barbara Westfield, who'd become an unexpected ally, a handful of other friends who'd witnessed their unlikely journey. Emma served as junior bridesmaid with a seriousness that made James's chest ache. She wore a purple dress with stars embroidered along the hem, her choice, and carried Lily in her arms with the careful pride of someone entrusted with precious cargo. Lily, now 6 months old and chubby, with health gurgled, contentedly oblivious to the significance of the occasion. Victoria wore a simple white dress that highlighted the strength in her shoulders, the grace she carried, despite never having thought of herself as graceful. James wore a dark suit, and when their eyes met across the small space, he saw his own emotions reflected: joy and terror and absolute certainty that this was right. The vows they'd written carried the weight of everything they'd survived. Victoria spoke first, her voice steady. I promise to show up every day, even when it's hard, to build this family with you, to choose you again and again. James responded with his own truth. I promise to love you and our girls with everything I have, to be your partner in all things, to never let you forget that you're not alone. When they kissed, Emma clapped enthusiastically and Lily made a sound that might have been approval or might have been gas, and everyone laughed with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something genuine in a world that often felt performative. The reception flowed naturally catered dinner champagne toasts, the easy rhythm of people who'd earned the right to celebrate. Daniel's toast made James's eyes sting. To James, who taught me that family isn't just blood, it's showing up when it matters, and he's been showing up his whole life. Stephen raised his glass with genuine warmth. To Victoria, toughest CEO I've ever worked with, and apparently toughest mother too. Turns out you can have it all, you just need the right partner. Emma insisted on her own toast delivered with apple juice instead of champagne. To my dad and Victoria, you guys are pretty cool for old people. And to Lily, the best baby sister ever, even though she drools a lot. More laughter, and James felt the weight of the past year settling into memory, the sharp edges softening into something he could carry without bleeding. Later, after guests had left and Emma was asleep in her room and Lily fed and down for the night, James and Victoria stood on their balcony watching Chicago settle into its nighttime rhythm, still in their wedding clothes, neither ready to let the day end quite yet. This is nice, Victoria said, leaning against him. Which part? All of it. The wedding, the family, this moment. She turned to face him. A year ago, I was convinced my life was complete. Had everything I needed: career, independence, control. I had no idea what I was missing. James kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with baby powder and the faint residue of champagne. I was terrified a year ago, thought I'd figured out my life, Emma and me against the world. Didn't think I had room for anyone else, didn't think I was brave enough to try. I'm glad we were both wrong. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from having weathered storms together, and emerged stronger for it. From inside, Lily made small sounds, not crying, just making her presence known. Victoria moved to check on her, and James followed, watching as she lifted their daughter from the bassinet. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Did I miss something? Just Lily saying hello, come here, bug. All four of them ended up in the master bedroom, Emma on the bed, James and Victoria sitting with Lily between them. This was the family they'd built, not through perfect planning or ideal circumstances, but through choice. Daily choice to show up, to try to love, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Emma yawned, already half asleep again. Can I sleep with you guys tonight, just this once? Victoria and James exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that had developed over months of partnership. Victoria smiled. Of course you can. They settled Emma on one side, Lily and her bassinet on the other, Victoria in the middle with James's arm around her. Perfect chaos, exactly as it should be. James thought about Rachel, about promises made and kept. Emma would never forget her mother. James made sure of that through stories and photos and visits to her grave. But Emma would also know what it meant to be part of a whole family, to be loved by two parents who chose each other and chose their daughters every single day. Lily made a contented sound in her sleep. Emma's breathing evened out. Victoria's hand found his in the darkness. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for. Thank you for not giving up on us. They closed their eyes knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, sleepless nights, and difficult decisions, the constant balance between work and family, all the messy reality of real life. But tonight they had this moment of peace and completion, this family they'd built from an accident and a choice. James had started this journey thinking he knew what his life would look like. Him and Emma careful and controlled, no room for risk or vulnerability. Victoria had built an empire thinking that was enough, that success could substitute for connection. They'd both been wrong, and in being wrong, they'd found something neither had known: to look for a partner, a family, a love that didn't require perfection, just presence. Outside Chicago glittered in the night. Inside, four people slept in one bed, tangled together in the kind of intimacy that only came from choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. This was everything. This was enough. This was the life they'd built together, imperfect and beautiful, and absolutely worth every sacrifice it had required. And when morning came, they'd wake up and choose it all over again.